I'm looking for creative ways to celebrate our organization's 10th anniversary. We're a smaller nonprofit with 3 employees and about 50 volunteers. I would love to make it a fundraising event. However, our bank of individual donors is quite small. Any thoughts?
I think you have to be clear on what the goals are. And so is it an opportunity to share your impact, to just, kind of increase credibility of here's been our impact over 10 years? Is it, as you said, something you want to actually generate revenue from? Maybe it can fulfill a few of these different things, and maybe it doesn't have to be done as just an event. So I think when you're a small organization like you are, it can be a lot of work to put on an event that, candidly speaking, you're more excited about the 10 years than anyone else is. And I know that sounds awful, but it's the reality of it. Sometimes we get more excited, right? We're like, yes, we've been around 10 years. And everyone else is like, okay, great. But move on, right? So I think you've got to be realistic about it and the resources you put into it. What I will share, though, is that I love that you're thinking about what you could do and some ideas that are very tactical, but that might help kind of make you think about it in a different way. I've seen organizations where they don't just boil it down to one event. It's maybe throughout the year, like we're going to do a series of things throughout the year. So we have this kind of year-long continued message of we're 10 years old and here's what we see for our next 10 years. And there's some really powerful messaging in it. So it could look everything from from a fundraising perspective, you do an online campaign of, your $10 will do this, or $10, give $10 for our anniversary, or multipliers of 10. Like I've seen people do that kind of stuff. Storytelling campaigns, right? Who has helped you over the last 10 years, or what are impact stories of people's lives or things you've done over the past 10 years that you can also sprinkle in. I've seen organizations where it'll be like, okay, we're going to have 10 stories throughout the next whatever period of time that we're going to share. Creative ways to play off the number 10 ways to support our nonprofit. And it's ways beyond financially, right? It could be financials, one of those, but maybe it's volunteerism. Maybe it's advocacy work. Maybe it's, hey, we need somebody to help us spread our message on social media. So there's lots of creative ways. I've seen groups do it that are less expensive and time intensive than putting on an event. It's not, I know we've talked about events before and everyone knows how we feel about them. It's not that I'm anti-event. If you really don't have a lot of capacity, an event can be a lot of time, energy, work, and money that sometimes doesn't have the return you want. So I just try to think about how you might be able to expand your ideas beyond just the event.
Nonprofit governance.
Nonprofit answers.
Nonprofit board. Nonprofit management.
Nonprofit marketing. Nonprofit resources.
Welcome to Nonprofit Everything, the podcast where hosts Andy Shurick and Stacey Wedding answer your questions about all things nonprofit.
All right, Stacey, this was so successful last time. First of all, welcome to the Nonprofit Everything podcast. I'm Andy Shurick. I'm here with Stacey Wedding. We answer nonprofit questions that you send us. And Stacey and I, one of the things that we both struggle with is extemporaneous intros. This is, for some reason, we find this very difficult. And so we cheat. And I have some conversation cards. And they were given to us by AmeriCorps, and it's the Not My Kid program from AmeriCorps, and they are cards for adults and children, basically to help adults understand that their kids are bullies. So that's why some of these are very serious questions, but they're broken into child questions and adult questions. So I asked Stacey, would you like a grown-up question or a kid question today?
Today I will have a kid question.
A kid question. Stacey, if you didn't have access to electronics for one day, how would your day change?
This should be a kid and adult question.
I know they're sneaky, aren't they?
I would get more sleep. I would. Okay, sorry. I got to put as an adult, that is how I would answer. As a kid, how
no, you are an adult. You get to answer as an adult. It's just happened to be a kid question.
Oh, that's true. It's a kid question. Okay, so I don't have to like put my brain in the child's brain. So, no, sleep is actually one of those. I think, more than sleep, I think I would get involved in things that were more playful, and this is sort of kid related, but things that are like I have these coloring books around the house, right? That are the ones that, kind of, it's like you just take out your colored pencils and you color on them. And I love doing that. I love board games. I enjoy just sort of reading a book, like a good old fashioned, not a book that is on a Kindle, right? But like a good old fashioned book that I can hold in my hand. So that is absolutely what I would do. And this sounds so lovely right now. So I think maybe this is a sign I need to lock up my electronics.
Sounds like it's a blessing.
It is.
Like if you didn't have access to electronics, you'd be like, I'd have a party.
I actually have talked to people recently who've said that they try to go on vacations in places where they don't have good internet access. And I was like, that is a brilliant strategy, because we are our own worst enemies in this, as I think a digital society, kids of all ages, adults of all ages, I think we struggle with it. So anyways, thank you for the question, Andy. And welcome to another episode of Nonprofit Everything. Andy, here's a question for you. Can you please explain the public support test? How frequently do organizations fail it? And what are the leading indicators that an organization might be headed toward failure?
Oh, fun. And it's one that involves math. It's even better.
Oh, it's right up your alley. I didn't know if you said, oh, fun, like really giddy about it, or if that was a sarcastic, oh, fun.
Oh, no, it's never sarcastic. It's always, unless it's about galas. If you want to ask us about silent auctions again, we'll get sarcastic about that for sure.
Yes.
So the public support test. So where this shows up and where you'll see the words public support test are in your 990 when you're putting your 990 together. And the sort of, if we go all the way back, like what it's trying to do is trying to determine if your 501c3 is a private foundation or if it is a public charity. So that's what it's testing, is whether, or that's the result of the test, I guess, is what's gonna be your kind of organization. And the reason that's important is because if you're a private foundation, that you don't get as many tax benefits. There's like excise taxes if you have investment revenue, and there's all kinds of other stuff that comes along that's not necessarily great if you're a private foundation. That gets a lot better if you're publicly supported, if you're a public charity. And so the test itself is whether or not you're publicly supported. So is the general public the one that's giving you the money to support yourself? Or does it come from like one or two or a very small number of people? So what the public support test is, according to the 990, is more than 1/3. And it's like, I love that it's a third. It's very specific. It's not half, it's a third. Is more than 1/3 of the money coming from the general public. And the general public means not board members, not insiders, not people that are directly connected to the organization. Does it come from everywhere else? And if you don't reach the 1/3, you sort of fall back, and the 990 does it for you. You don't have to worry about it. Like as you fill out the 990, you fill out that section. It asks you about like, is the revenue received come from the general public? And you do a couple of deductions and you end up with this equation. At the end of it, it's like either like you are a 501c3 public charity or you're a 501c3 private foundation and you need to do the 990 PF. Like it just like shunts you off into another tax form, right?
Yeah.
And there's all these like side things about like whether the main money came from, did it come from investment revenue? Did it come from a single individual? It gets very sort of complicated in detail, but I don't know that we need to necessarily go into that to describe it. The other thing that's interesting about it is it's not 1 year. Like you actually average out your public support over a 5-year period. So like a longer term of 5 years. And what this allows like newer organizations to do is to say, okay, we're going to go for a big bang splash. We've got a funder. They're really excited about it, but it's just like one person. And so they don't immediately like, okay, you're a private foundation because it's one person. They're like, if you think that within 5 years, you can get this balance to the point where a third of it is coming from the public, then you're okay. Then you can continue to operate like a public charity. And then we'll just average it. This is like rolling 5-year window that looks at your public support over a longer period of time, which then allows you to stay a public charity and not a private foundation.
So question, did that 5-year rule change recently? I know in some of the materials I read, just prepping for this, the answer to this question, one of the things I saw was that it sounds like the 5 years maybe that used to be, and now it sounds like it's maybe now looking more at 2 years. Have you heard anything about that, Andy, out there, that shifting?
The 2 years is when if you do like go over that 5-year average and then drop below a third, you don't immediately turn into a private foundation. You get like actually 1 year grace period before you turn into a private foundation, which again gives you time to sort of correct, because swapping from a public charity to a private foundation would be a catastrophic for an organization. And so they want to give you as many opportunities to like kind of get on the right track as possible while making sure that people that either don't know what they're doing or pretending to be a public charity but are really a private foundation actually end up in the status they're supposed to end up in. So, the IRS, I think, is trying to give you some grace. They're trying not to make it hard on nonprofits to make it more difficult than it needs to be because it's already really hard.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, but I know one of the questions was how frequently do organizations fail it? I mean, in my history of working with nonprofits, I've never run into an organization that has failed it, or at least maybe they haven't shared that with me. So that's probably the caveat, right? But it's not, and I also am not dealing with them to the degree you are on financials and that kind of thing. I just wonder how many organizations don't even know how to calculate the public support test. Then they're, just someone who is a volunteer is trying to figure it out and may even be miscalculating. I'm going to guess there's some of that may be going on versus if you get, CPA or someone well-versed in finances who's doing it, I'm assuming, you're probably got a more accurate track record of whether you truly are publicly supported. Is that an unfair bias of mine?
No, I don't think so. I think the folks that are truly doing it wrong are probably small enough that they're filling out the 990N where it never asks.
Yeah.
Like you don't actually have to do it for the 990N because you're too small. The IRS isn't going to care. So they don't put the question on there. If you're big enough, I mean, we saw this too before the 990N even existed. And again, for those of you that don't know, the 990N is the postcard form. It asks you 4 or 5 questions, and that's your 990. You're pretty much done. And it's not hard at all. And once you get to the grown-up 990, and before the postcard existed, I used to see 990s that were just completely wrong. Like somebody would go through, there's like a whole section where it's like governance questions and have you filled out the right forms and all that kind of stuff. And people would just go through and like check yes or check no all the way down the line when that's not the way you're supposed to do that. You're supposed to read them all and then answer them truthfully, not just assume that they're trying to, like it's a multiple choice test in high school and you're going to guess C on everything because that's going to give you the highest ratio of right answers or something. I don't know.
Hey, I remember doing that.
But so I don't know. I think the number that like officially fail is probably close to 0 because if you're doing the full 990, it means you're getting help with it probably. And either you're answering it completely wrong because you don't know what you're doing, or like you said, you're getting help from a professional that's going to help you figure it out and then correct it for you. Like say, well, we need to figure this out so that you can continue to exist. Because if you're big enough, you're either willfully doing it wrong, you're doing it wrong on purpose, or you just grew big enough and you don't know what you don't know. So I'd say there are probably lots of baby organizations that would fail the test if they knew about it and if they had to report on it. But it's not something that I've seen like of big organizations having to change status at all.
And I think when we think about the question of, what are the leading indicators that an organization might be headed toward failure, I think it goes back to what you mentioned and what we've talked about is if you only have, a very small handful of donors making really large donations, right, to support your organization. And that goes back to, you do see that sometimes with smaller or baby nonprofits. There's a few people who are putting all their resources behind it. But you even can see that as organizations start to grow if they haven't really figured out how to diversify some of their support and balance that out. So I think just always looking at, okay, we got a really unexpected large gift, or maybe it wasn't unexpected. What exactly does that mean for us? And what does that mean for our fundraising efforts? So, it makes me wonder if there's any sense in you don't want to turn down the money, but if it's going to, and because you have another, you have some time, it's not based on just that 1 year and it's the 5 years you mentioned, it just makes me wonder, do you even worry about it that year? Or do you think about saying to the donor, can we look at a different way to structure your gift so that we're not thrown into this weirdness? Have you seen that done?
No, and I don't know that I would. I mean, so we've simplified the test too. And because there are parts of it that allow for mega donations that are surprises. So, because it's the kind of thing that we negotiated out when we created this 990, or we created the way that the IRS was going to test. So it's usually most organizations that are truly public and are raising money from the public, have no problem with the public support test, even if you get a big surprise donation. So it's not something that I would try to game the system or anything. You just if that scenario comes up, just make sure you're talking to it about with your finance folks and say, this happens. Does this affect our public support test? Make them read all the regulations, and then they'll go, oh, there's this loophole that says, right, and it explains why you don't have to worry about it. I think if you're looking at other organizations, if you're a funder and you're curious about the health of another organization and you think that this is something that could be a challenge for them and they are filling out the full 990, I mean, that's right there on the 990 too. You can see 5 years worth of public support test, pass or fail. And if it's 34%, 33.5%, 35%, maybe it's something to ask them about. You appear to be funded by a single person. How are you diversifying your funding? Or is this just one person's passion project and you have no intention of ever expanding it beyond that, right? That's a good question to ask. So I don't know. It's one of those things that I'm not super concerned about. I mean, there's so many other scary things in nonprofits that the public support test is probably 500th down on my list of things to be worried about.
Yeah, I'm not sure it even makes it up on my list, if I'm being really honest, because I've never heard anyone fail it and actually share that they failed it. So that's the good news for our listeners. Take that worry off your mind, because this isn't probably something. It's important to be generally aware of it and not get focused and crazed like I did when we got the question. As I shared with Andy, I started going down the rabbit hole of all the regs and all the exceptions and, but in this circumstance, this, and it can very quickly become overwhelming for someone like me who is not the finance brain and guru you are, Andy. So leave it to the people who are smarter than you. That's my piece of advice.
How do we justify hiring staff when we've always been 100% volunteer run? We have a working board managing the day-to-day ops with no paid staff. Board members, donors, and even those we serve love that we're 100% volunteer run and love that we don't have to fundraise to pay for staff. I've put in almost 2,000 hours each year the last few years, and I'm falling behind and getting tired. I know I'm not alone. What messaging will people understand so they'll embrace fundraising to support the hiring of staff?
First of all, thank you for your commitment. 2,000 hours a year is a whole lot of time. So
That's a full-time job.
Yeah, I was like, wow, that's impressive. So thank you for your commitment. That's huge. We need more people like you in the world. And of course you're getting tired, because I'm tired just reading that question and listening to Andy share it. So I think there's a few things to think about with this. So obviously the board, probably because it is all volunteer, needs to make the decision about hiring staff. And I don't know enough about your budget. It sounds like you probably haven't had to do a ton of fundraising up to this point. So I think that first you've got to have a pretty candid discussion with the board about, here's the reality. And if it's just you doing the work, or if there's others like you doing the work, explaining to them the risk of burnout, the fact that if you were gone, they would have to either find somebody else who would give that much time, which is probably highly unlikely, or they would have to hire somebody. And what would that look like? So that discussion can kind of open, I think, up the conversation, just being like honest and transparent. And then if volunteers are still going to be a cornerstone of your organization, even after hiring paid staff, I think it's about still celebrating those volunteers. Maybe instead of saying you're volunteer run, you are powered by volunteers, and you can talk about that, right? That's just a messaging shift to sort of help people understand volunteers are still a core component of what you do. And I guess the other thought I have is just think about how much you could probably continue to scale and build and grow if you had the more staff you have, the more paid staff you have, in general translates to more impact, because volunteers aren't usually willing to put in 2,000 hours, aren't willing to give as much as you've given. So I think just sort of making the case for impact, that more people that you can, and maybe you start with a part-time executive director or whatever that role looks like, but starting small and then kind of going and expanding and just evaluating, how is this working for us? Because what I find with all volunteer run organizations is they're all so busy doing the work. No one's actually taking care of the volunteers. So imagine if you could be in a position, or someone was paid to be in a position to actually help recruit, manage, recognize, do all the things you should do with volunteers to make it a positive experience. I'm going to guess that none of you are probably doing that right now with your volunteer work. It's just in the weeds, in the trenches, right? So imagine the power of a paid position, what that could do. So those are some of the things I would use moving forward. But I think honesty and transparency and having that conversation with the board is where it's got to start. There's probably some potential for pushback. What do you like from the board if they don't want to have to fundraise? What do you think, Andy? Like, you think there could be some pushback there of like, oh, we don't want to have to fundraise for staff position?
Yeah, because you set that expectation. You've talked about how you're 100% volunteer run, and you said that people love that you don't have to fundraise to pay for staff. I think you should let me go first on this one, because my answer is going to be way more of a downer. like Stacey's like, here's all the ways to solve it. You're going to be fine. And I'm like, oh, you're doomed. Because here's the problem. The nonprofits are super hard. Like, this is not something that you do as a dilettante and just decide, hey, we want to save the world. Let's just go. It's a super complicated kind of business that you've created. And when it's 100% volunteer run, that tells me that there's a lot of stuff that's not, all the boring stuff isn't getting done. Like the people that are like reading the details of the D&O insurance and all the junk that all making sure that you're compliant with all of the, whatever the state rules and for charity solicitations, just the junk that needs to be done that is so boring and so terrible, you have to pay somebody to do it. And if you're not paying somebody to do it, it's probably not getting done at all. It's so hard to tell people that are passionate about something, especially to tell them. It's easier to do on a podcast because I'm not looking at your face while I'm doing it. But like, it's really hard to tell someone that, like, the way you do it right, if you really want it to thrive and grow and be great over a long period of time, is to think about it with the lens of like, I am starting a business. Like, just to say that to yourself, I'm going to start a brand new business. What things do I need to think about to start a brand new business? And the first thing you're going to think about is revenue. Like, where's the money going to come from to make this thing work? And if you don't have that piece of it solved, you don't really have a business. You've got, I don't know what you have. You just have a whole bunch of people that are getting together on the weekend to, I don't know, clean up ditches or something. I don't know what it is. But so without that sort of rigorous, like, we are in this for the long run, you're going to get to a point where you're at, like right now, where you're like, okay, we think we're doing great. We want to grow. We want to be better. We want to solve our problem in new, more complicated ways. We want to be eligible for federal grants or foundation grants so that we can expand our impact. All those exciting things you're thinking about, you just can't do because it's impossible to do it with a 100% volunteer run organization. Or am I wrong? I mean, Stacey, you know better than I do. Are there organizations that are really succeeding that are 100% volunteer run?
There are a few I'm thinking of, and they've done it for years, and they have sort of a feeder model for the volunteers. So there's an ongoing, so like assistance leagues around. I
was thinking of assistance league, but they've got a thrift shop. I mean, they have a built-in revenue model. That's the one I was thinking of. They've got a built-in revenue model, and you're right. It's very service oriented, and you join. I think there might be membership dues. I don't remember. Somebody from Assistance League can call in and correct us, but there's a built-in revenue source. Like, so unless you've already got that, this is a really hard road to go down.
I agree. I totally agree with what you're saying. I'm not sure I've seen a model without a built-in revenue model that is all volunteer run that works. And I also think that this is just part of staff helps professionalize an organization. And that's what we're talking about here, right? Taking it to the next level. I do think your biggest obstacle is going to be dealing with an organization that's prided itself. Like, I feel like it needs that messaging needs to change. Like, right? This is not shameful that we want to fundraise to hire staff. Here's what the benefits are going to look like. It's going to be better for our volunteers. It's going to be better for those we're serving. That's the message that has to be conveyed. And boards either willing to do it or they're not. And that's going to answer a lot for you, because if they're not willing to do it, and don't let them, whatever you do not let the board say, hey, you know this work better than anyone. You could be the messenger. You go fundraise for your own role, because I could see that happening too. And that's just that's not fair. So, and not the way it should be. Yeah.
I think if there's any good news, it's that you're not the only organization that's faced this. It's not uncommon. And lots of organizations pivot off of things that were critical to the way they worked for years. Like this is our mission. We're doing this one thing. And then they're like, oh, we don't actually need to do that anymore because something's different now. Like, March of Dimes is a perfect example. Like, oh, so we pretty much solved polio. Great. What's next? Right. So we moved on to a new topic. So I think if people recognize that the mission is in the right place and you're executing on the mission, like, it's probably not an impossible conversation to say, like, we're doing a great job. And one of the things that's preventing us from doing a better job is that it's 100% volunteer run, which we've prided ourselves on for years and years and years. But we're finally coming to realize that, like, that's a limiting factor in our ability to solve this. I think most people would respond to that. And again, part of this is, I say again, I don't think I've said this yet. I don't know why I said again.
In your head, you said it, Andy.
I was thinking about this like a couple of seconds ago, which is why I'm saying again. Some of the friction that I think you're feeling in this particular question too, is that fundraising is hard and it's not something you've done before. Right. And so if for somebody who's not a fundraiser, who hasn't experienced it or hasn't grown up in it, it really does feel like, oh my God, how am I going to do that? Like, I don't know how to ask people for money. That's impossible. And the truth is, you're like 95% of the way there, because you've got an organization that's got a good story and a good mission, and you're successful up to this point. That's what gets people to donate. Not the fact that you're good at asking for money, but the fact that the mission makes sense and that people want you to do good work. That's what's going to convince people to give you $20. So I don't think it's quite as impossible as you think. I'm revising my doom and gloom
Your
a little bit after having
yes.
thought about it. Yeah. I'm feeling better today.
See, do you feel a little better? The person who's listening to this that wrote the question, do you feel a little better now? Because Andy came full circle. So at least, maybe half circle. Maybe it was more of a half circle.
Maybe when I started talking, they just rage quit the podcast. They're like, enough of these people, right? Thanks for joining us today, Stacey and I very much appreciate that you take your time out of your day to listen to the podcast. Send us questions. Easiest way to do that is to send them to go to the nonprofiteverything.com webpage. There's a big questions button you can click. It's also got every single one of our episodes along with like a topic listing. So if you're interested in something specific, after 150 something episodes, there's a pretty good chance we've already talked about it at least once. So if you're new to the podcast, you got a lot of catching up to do. They get better, but as you go along, some of the early ones are a little bit rough, but I don't know. Maybe is it endearing? I don't know.
No, hey, maybe we've improved a little bit, Andy. I was actually listening to 2 of our old episodes back from, I think it was 2021. And I was like, wow, I hope I've improved since then. I was telling someone about the episode and I was listening to the links before sending it to them. And I was a little embarrassed. Like I almost wanted to renege my offer to send it to them because I was like, no, I didn't actually used to talk like that. And we didn't have the sound system quite figured out. So hopefully you've witnessed our improvement over the years.
Let's hope so. But thanks again. And we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks.